Hello students, I hope all is well with you. Here we go, we're on Module 14A, which means we just finished 13, right? So that means that you have a quiz that's due. Alright, so I've been trying to figure out the Google Classroom, and now what we'll do is I'll get you loaded in there, and it invites you to be part of the classroom, and then I'll try to upload the quiz over there. If not, I will email you the quiz and we'll see how that works. Okay, sorry about that. All right, we're on Lab 27. It's page 66 in your student book. So if you want to open that up, I'll have some blanks for you to fill in. This week we're looking at the circulatory system. So you hear the word circle in there. Circulatory system is all about how the blood is distributed through your body in a giant circle, really like a figure eight type of a thing, and we'll be looking at the heart today. All right. So here is a picture over here on the left of the heart, okay, and I would have shown you a plastic model that I have of a heart, and we could open it up and take a look at the inside and everything. Blood is transported through your body with the use of this heart, which is a pump. All right, so it acts like a pump. Typically at this point I would ask you to put your two fists together. If you close your fists and then put them together, your two hands, and then pump your right fist and then your left fist. So your hands are together, you go pump, 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 and that's how you think of the heart as a pump, but it's really a dual pump. It's two pumps. So the right side pump pumps to one place, which is to your lungs, and the left side pump pumps to another place, which is the rest of your body. All right, so the left side of your heart has to pump further. So typically the left side of your heart is just a little bit bigger. So when you put your hand over your heart to say the pledge and that kind of thing, we do that because we can feel it heavier on our left side because the left side of our heart is pumping harder to get that blood distributed to the whole body there. So this is the human circulatory system, and you can see here we have the heart in the middle, and we have lots of vessels that are coming out from it. Okay, I need you to understand that when we are talking about the circulatory system and looking at the blood, when you see this, and we'll see a video in just a minute that calls this blue blood. All right, blue blood, when we show it blue like this, all that means is that it's deoxygenated blood. It's blood that has used up all the oxygen. Remember, blood is carrying oxygen to your tissues. And when it uses up, when your tissues use up that oxygen, it has to come back to get reoxygenated. And it does that by, of course, sending the blood to the lungs. We take a breath. Our oxygen we breathe in will saturate our blood with oxygen so that we can then send it to the rest of the body. Next week we will look at the respiratory system and see how that works. It's very complex actually. So when we show blue blood, it's just to differentiate deoxygenated blood from oxygenated blood. Blood never really is blue. I need you to understand that. You may look down at your arm and see like that blue vein or something on there and say, well, I can see it right there. Well, truth be told, veins are blue, okay, and so it looks that way. You've been cut before, I'm sure, and you see how the blood is bright red. That's because, of course, it's touching the oxygen in the room, and therefore it becomes bright red. Deoxygenated blood turns kind of a deep, I don't know, magenta purplish color maybe, and the reason is that it's never fully 100% depleted of its oxygen. It's such an efficient model that God has created here that we never really depleted of all the oxygen. Okay, so just remember, blue blood is a way to distinguish if it's going to the heart, the side of the heart that pumps to the lungs, versus the side of the heart that pumps to the rest of the body. Okay, which brings us to those vessels. So blood transport occurs in vessels. Here's your first blanks you'll be filling in. Veins are the vessels that carry blood to the heart, and arteries are vessels that carry blood away from the heart. So remember, arteries away. Okay, that's the best way to remember that. It's tempting to say that arteries carry oxygen-rich blood and veins carry oxygen-poor blood, but that's not true 100% of the time. It turns out that the vessels that are carrying blood away from the heart to the lungs is deoxygenated blood. Okay, so it's important that we distinguish that veins carry away to the heart and arteries carry away from the heart. When they meet up in the middle, so our artery is bringing oxygen-rich blood down here, it is going away from the heart, coming to the tissues. It'll break into smaller and smaller tubes right here called arterioles that end finally with very, very thin vessels called capillaries. And this is where the oxygen exchange takes place. And we'll see that next week. But it takes place here. So the oxygen that's in the blood leaks out into the cells that are here in these very, very, very thin capillaries. And then furthermore, the cells give back to the blood carbon dioxide to get rid of it, okay, which then carries it in the blue deoxygenated blood back to the heart to pump back to the lungs to not only breathe in oxygen to take that in to oxygenate the blood, but breathe out CO2 to get that out. It's a waste product to get it out. All right, so notice here that the wall of the artery is pretty thick versus the wall of the vein, which is thinner, and the wall of the capillary, which is very thin. Let's look at a picture closer up of that. I think that's here. Yes, there it is. All right, so the artery has a much thicker smooth muscle band around it, and that's because it's coming straight from the heart. So for instance, if you put your fingers on your wrist and you press down, you can feel your pulse, right? You've probably done that before. Sometimes it's easier to feel it when you put your fingers up on your neck. And you can feel your pulse right there. Well, what you're feeling is an artery. All right, so the artery, you have to kind of push kind of hard, right? Because the arteries are very deep. And they will have a pulse associated with them because that is the blood that's pumping out from the heart. Okay, so it has quite a bit of musculature to the tunic right here, okay, to that and the membrane right here, and it makes it much stronger to take the pressure of the heart pumping that blood through it. The veins have a thinner wall, and that's because they're not really getting that pumping from the heart right there. In fact, if you look down on your wrist, you can see maybe on the front of your hand some blue veins on there, and if you feel those, you won't feel any pumping right there. Okay, because those are headed back to your heart, right? And then look at the capillary down here. Look how thin. It's just one cell thick, right? Just one cell. And that's so that there can be the exchange of oxygen versus CO2 right through that membrane without any really resistance at all. The next thing you'll notice is something very unusual right here in the vein. Let's check this out. It's got this valve right here. Since the veins are farther away and the blood is coming back through them, as the arteries pump, it's one big giant circle, right? It's actually a big giant figure 8 going from the heart to the lungs, to the heart to the body, to the heart to the lungs, to the heart to the body. And when it's in the veins, it needs to make its way back without having the pump right behind it like the arteries have. And so what happens is as the blood flows through the vein, it has a one-way valve right here that will shut so that the blood doesn't wash backwards. Okay, it won't wash backward that way. And therefore, it'll keep going in the one direction. It's a beautiful design. God designed it that way so that we could have a very efficient circulatory system. This is going to be in your blanks that come next in your book. The first blank here we have, the heart is a muscular pump that never stops while you're alive, of course. It's good to keep your heart pumping. It's 6 to 8% of your body weight, and it has 4 chambers. If you remember nothing else about our heart, gang, remember that it has 4 chambers, please. Okay, very good. A blood cell will make a loop from your heart and then all the way down to your big toe and back in less than 1 minute. So it's pretty efficient. It's going all the way through our body very quickly. You have approximately 1.3 gallons of blood, and the heart will pump about 2,000 gallons through a 24-hour period. And you don't even have to think about it, do you? You don't have to tell your heart to pump. It's doing it all on its own, okay? That's involuntary muscular tissue. Remember, it's called cardiac tissue, and it's working so efficiently. It is a miracle of God's creation right there. Our blood vessels, we have a lot of them. I was going to tell you earlier about the capillary. If you look in the mirror at your eye, and you can see sometimes those little tiny blood vessels in your eye, those are capillaries. That's how thin they are. They're so thin that only one red blood cell can fit in at a time. That's thin. because red blood cells are tiny. And if we had all our blood vessels laid out end to end, including all those little tiny capillaries, it would be about 90,000 miles long. Isn't that crazy? We have lots and lots of blood vessels. We're going to be looking at the end of this lecture at blood itself. It consists of three main things, which are red blood cells, also known as RBCs, white blood cells, also known as WBCs, and platelets. Those are the three parts, plus plasma is the liquid portion of the blood. And I'll explain that when we get to it. Remember, if you need more time to write down what you see on this slide right here, go ahead and pause the presentation, and you can write down and take as long as you like, okay? Go right ahead. So let's look at our heart. Okay, here is the outside or the external anatomy of the heart. It's made up of highly specialized cardiac tissue. It's a muscular pump that never stops. The tissue, the cardiac tissue itself, is so specialized that if I took a cell off of your heart and by itself, the cell itself would be beating. All right, just like the heart is beating, the cells beat. They're very specialized. Oxygenated blood, remember that's already come from the lungs. It will go out of this very large vessel right here called the aorta. That is the largest artery in the body. And notice it's got some vessels going upward. Guess where that's going? Up to your head, right, to get blood to your brain. That's important. But it also makes a giant curve and comes all the way down right here. That's taking it to your trunk, to your lower part of your body. Sometimes if you lay flat on your back and you look at your chest, and just below it, like at the top of your stomach area, you can actually see your aorta pumping. You can actually see it beating. So you may want to give that a try. Okay. The heart tissue itself, right here, it's very red, right? Because it's got a lot of blood vessels coming to it. It needs a lot of blood because guess what? It's pumping all the time. So if it's pumping all the time, it needs a lot of energy, doesn't it? So I need a lot of ATP going there. I need lots of mitochondria that are making the ATP, right? The powerhouse of the cell, because it's going all the time. So these vessels, these are the main cardiac vessels, these big ones here and here, and they're feeding this muscle tissue with all those blood vessels. Now, if there should be a clot or some sort of obstruction of the vessels that are feeding the heart itself, that is what's known as a myocardial infarction, better known as a heart attack. So that's how a heart attack happens. It's if these vessels themselves cut off blood supply to the muscle itself. It doesn't have anything to do with the interior of the heart. It has everything to do with the muscle of the heart. I'm talking about heart attacks now. All right, we're going to see all these other vessels right here, which are going to be leading, so typically if they're red, they're oxygenated blood. If they're blue, they're deoxygenated blood. Vena cava, this is a vein. So we know that the aorta is going away. The vein is coming to. This is the biggest vein in the body. Superior, meaning above. This is all the blood coming from your head down to your heart to go in to be put back into the pulmonary trunk to send back to the lungs. All right, and it's inferior down here, also going down to the lower parts of your body where the blood is coming back up to the heart right there. Okay, so there's the external anatomy of the heart. And let's watch a little video. It's very good, actually. It's a little old-fashioned or whatever, but it does have very good information. So just sit tight and listen.
Your heart is a pump. It's a muscular organ about the size of your fist and is located slightly left of center in your chest. Your heart is divided into the right and left side. The division protects oxygen-rich blood from mixing with oxygen-poor blood. Together, your heart and blood vessels comprise your cardiovascular system, which circulates blood and oxygen around your body. In fact, your heart pumps about 5 quarts of blood every minute, and it beats about 100,000 times in one day. That's about 35 million times in a year. Oxygen-poor blood, blue blood, returns to the heart after circulating through your body. The right side of the heart, composed of the right atrium and ventricle, collects and pumps the blood to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. The lungs refresh the blood with a new supply of oxygen, making it turn red. Oxygen-rich blood, red blood, then enters the left side of the heart, composed of the left atrium and ventricle, and is pumped through the aorta to the body to supply tissues with oxygen. 4 valves within your heart keep your blood moving the right way. The tricuspid, mitral, pulmonary, and aortic valves work like gates on a fence. They open only one way and only when pushed on. Each valve opens and closes once per heartbeat, or about once every second. A beating heart contracts and relaxes. Contraction is called systole, and relaxing is called diastole. During systole, your ventricles contract, forcing blood into the vessels going to your lungs and body, much like ketchup being forced out of a squeeze bottle. The right ventricle contracts a little bit before the left ventricle does. Your ventricles then relax during diastole and are filled with blood coming from the upper chambers, the left and right atria. Then the cycle starts over again. Your heart is nourished by blood too. Blood vessels called coronary arteries extend over the surface of your heart and branch into smaller capillaries. Here you can see just the network of blood vessels that feed your heart with oxygen-rich blood. Your heart also has electrical wiring, which keeps it beating. Electrical impulses begin high in the right atrium and travel through specialized pathways to the ventricles, delivering the signal to pump. The conduction system keeps your heart beating in a coordinated and normal rhythm, which in turn keeps blood circulating. The continuous exchange of oxygen-rich blood with oxygen-poor blood is what keeps you alive.
All right. So that introduced us to the interior of the interior anatomy of the heart. Okay, so let's see. There are 4 chambers. We know that, right? Blood from the body enters at the right atrium. Okay, so that's the name of this right. So notice I'm pointing to the left side, right? Because if the heart were in you, that'd be your right side of the body. Does that make sense to you? Okay, so picture that heart in your chest, right? The right atrium's on your right side. Okay, so the right atrium is the upper chamber. Now the upper chamber also has, you can hear sometimes it called auricle. So the atrium's the actual chamber, and the auricle is like a little almost balloon top that fills up with it as well. So it's not really an interchangeable word, but if you hear auricle, think atrium. Okay, so the blood from the body comes from the superior vena cava. It comes from the superior and inferior down here, dumps into the right atrium, and then it squeezes, the heart squeezes and pushes the blood down into the right ventricle, right down here. Okay, now I want you to think about this for a minute. When you flex your muscle in your arm, does that make a noise? You know that your heart makes that noise, thump, 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 like that, right? Well, it's not the muscle that's making that noise, because muscle doesn't make noise when you contract it. What's making the noise are these little valves right here. So that little valve, the blood comes through, and then that valve slaps shut, and it makes that sound. And then over here on this side, which we'll get to in a minute, that slaps shut right after it. So it goes slap, 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 slap. So the sound you're hearing, the lub-dub of the heart, is really the shutting of those valves. Okay, so the blood comes from the right atrium, pushed into the right ventricle. That tricuspid valve slaps shut. It has 3 little parts to it. That's why it's called tricuspid. Then the pump pushes it up through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery. Now keep in mind, this is deoxygenated blood, right? And it's going through an artery, which is away. Where's it going? It's going to the lungs. Okay, so that's why we can't call all arteries oxygenated blood, because it's not really oxygenated blood, is it? Right. So it goes to the lungs, it gets oxygenated there, and then it enters in the pulmonary vein with fully oxygenated blood into the left atrium. Oxygen-rich blood enters from the lungs to the left atrium, right here. Remember that upper part of it's called the auricle. And it gets pumped down to the left ventricle, and then big pump all the way out the aorta to the rest of the body. Okay, you'll see right here, this tissue is thicker on the left side of the heart than it is over here on the right side. Why is that? That's because this ventricle has to pump much farther than this ventricle, right? This one's only pumping to the lungs, which are right there. This one's pumping all the way down to the big toe. All right, so that's how that works. And all those parts, I'm going to, okay, here we see it pumping. This is the external part of it, right? So big muscle, pump, 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 like a double pump right there. And then we can see on the inside, this is kind of nice because it shows the blood filling the chambers and going up. I remember the right side pumps just a little earlier than left side, so pump, pump, there, pump, pump. Yeah, it's just a little bit delayed right there. So that shows the which way the blood goes. I believe that in your book you're going to have a question tracing like where does a blood cell go? You know, so it goes all the way to your toe, it comes up, it comes through the right atrium, right ventricle to the lungs, left atrium, left ventricle to the aorta, that kind of thing. So you'll follow it throughout. Okay, so what is blood exactly? All blood is manufactured in the bone marrow. You already knew that. When we learned about bones, we learned that one of the functions of bone was to make blood, right? It's making red blood cells, it's making white blood cells, it's making it all. There's a liquid portion to blood. It is called plasma right here. It's kind of they call a straw-colored liquid, a slightly yellow liquid. Some people call it serum, and that's okay, but typically plasma is the right name for it. It has a solid portion down here made up of erythrocytes, also known as red blood cells or RBCs, and a little tiny layer right here of white blood cells. Now I show this tube to you like this to show how it is separated. When in a lab setting, I used to take blood samples, and when I had them in a tube, what I would do was I would let them clot and then put them into a centrifuge and spin them down, and I would end up with the red cells all on the bottom, a little layer, unless the animal was sick, of white blood cells. If they're sick, they might have a bigger layer of white blood cells. And then this plasma, which was then available for me to test it. So I could take that plasma out and test it for certain enzymes and proteins and things like this to see if the animal had an illness of some kind. I can also take blood and put an anticoagulant in it so it doesn't clot, and then I can test the red blood cells and white blood cells for things. I can do a count of how many white blood cells there are and things like that. Okay, but just keep in mind there's the liquid portion and the solid portion of blood. This is what they look like under a microscope. All right, so the red blood cells, they're pretty small. They look like little donuts, right? So these cells, it turns out they don't have a nucleus in them, which is unusual for a cell to not have a nucleus. It turns out red blood cells have a short lifespan, about 4 days. Is that right? 4 days. And then they go and new blood cells are being constantly made to replace them. They have one job, that is to carry oxygen to the tissues. The other cells, we have platelets, are little particles of cells that become very, very sticky if there's been a cut in the vessel. So this is the way platelets are there to help us clot our blood to keep us from bleeding to death. Then the rest of our cells are much larger. They're called white blood cells. Okay, the most common white blood cell is this one right here. It's called a segmented neutrophil. Segmented because look at its nucleus. It's got little segments, right? And then if you look at a slide, you're going to see mostly these guys right here. Sometimes it looks a little bit like a set of headphones in there. Okay. This, by the way, these ones on the top are called granulocytes because they have granules in them. But you don't typically see those unless you're looking at the eosinophil. The basophil right here is a little bit larger. It's not got a segmented nucleus. It's got a nucleus that looks more like this. I remember when I would look at them under the scope, I would see if they looked like the letter B. So that kind of looks like a letter B there. Looks like an H actually. But anyway, this is just an artist rendition. The eosinophil, notice, looks also like headphones, but they have massive granules in them. In fact, they're the coolest ones to see under the microscope. They look really, really great. Those are present naturally unless you have a parasitic infection. You'll have lots of eosinophils. So that's one of the indications of a patient having a parasitic infection if we do a blood count and find lots of eosinophils in there. Next we have the agranulocytes, these two down here. The monocyte is the largest one, the largest white cell. It's called the big macrophage. Its job is to gobble up bacteria and things like that. That's what white cells do. White cells are going to go in and take care of any invaders in our body. If we have an invasion of of parasites, an invasion of bacteria, even an invasion of viruses, although viruses tend to trick the body a little bit, which makes it tough for our immune system to deal with it, which is one of the reasons viruses tend to be such a problem, kind of like the virus that's facing our world right now, right? It's trying to take over. And fortunately, our body has such a wonderful immune system that it can eventually handle it in most cases. All right, lastly, I want to talk here about the lymphocytes. They're the second most common white cell in the body. Furthermore, they are very, very specialized. So you know that all blood cells are made in the bones. And that's true. All of these, including these white cells, are made in the red bone marrow. But these lymphocytes are special because they can go and camp out in something called a lymph node. And when they're sitting in the lymph node, if you get an infection of some sort, the lymph node will be notified and more lymphocytes can be made, not in the bone, but right there in the lymph node. And we will cover that when we look at the lymph system in module 15 in a few weeks. Okay, so we'll see how special those lymphocytes are. Rest assured, those are the ones that are protecting us not only against bacterial infections, but against viral infections. They end up actually giving our body a memory of certain viral infections that have invaded our bodies. So what is blood? We're going to watch a little video here, once again, a little bit old-fashioned, but lots of good information, so just enjoy.
What is blood? Blood is actually a mixture of cells suspended in a slightly yellowish liquid called plasma. Plasma is made up mostly of water, but it also contains proteins, sugars, hormones, and salts. The three different types of cells you'll find in plasma are red blood cells, or erythrocytes, white blood cells, or leukocytes, and platelets, or thrombocytes. Red blood cells give the blood its color and make up 40 to 45% of your blood. They're round and look a little like a donut without the hole in the middle. Their main job is to carry oxygen to the other cells of the body and to take away the carbon dioxide as a waste product. Red blood cells only live 4 months, but healthy bone marrow produces 4 to 5 billion red cells every hour to keep replenishing the ones that wear out. White blood cells, on the other hand, are the body's defense system. They all fight infection from bacteria, viruses, all those nasty microbes that can cause disease. Whenever germs begin to infect your body, they send out a signal that the granulocyte recognizes. Just as soon as the granulocyte detects the signal, it begins its journey to the site of the infection. When at last they find the invader germ, they quickly move in for the kill, first attacking the invader and then eating it. Something else that is truly amazing is how the platelets work. Platelets are small pieces of cell material, or cytoplasm, whose job it is to plug holes in the vessel walls. So, say you're standing inside the blood vessel and looking at the tear in its wall. You'd see millions of platelets responding to the injury, throwing themselves over the cut. They stick to the wound's edges and to each other to form a plug that slows the loss of blood within 3 to 5 minutes. A platelet plug will last for only 24 to 72 hours because the platelets run out of energy and begin to fall apart. But as long as there is still an unhealed hole in the blood vessel wall, the clot will continue being formed, dissolved, and reformed to stop and prevent more bleeding from occurring. When the wound is completely healed by the new cells growing over it, the clot will be cleared away and blood will begin to flow through the vessel normally.
All right, so that's a good overview of what blood is. What about blood types? You've heard all about this, right? Do any of you have any idea what your blood type is? It's possible. Maybe not. I know mine. I am O positive. That's the most common. It's right over here. It shows you right here. Okay, so what are blood types? What is it talking about? Well, it's talking about certain markers on your cell. Okay, so for instance, all of our cells have little markers on them, little proteins that distinguish who we are. You know, it's kind of like your fingerprint. The cell will identify you, and it'll tell your body that it's your cell. And that's important for the body to know, so that it doesn't try to send its white cells to destroy your own cells. That would not be good. All right, so there are 4 different blood types. There's type AB, A, B, and O. There's also this thing called the Rh factor, positive and negative. You either have it, that's that little black box right there, or you don't have it. The vast majority of humans have it. Somewhere in the area of 90% or something, people have Rh positive. We're going to watch a little video to help explain all of this to you.
It's often said that despite humanity's many conflicts, we all bleed the same blood. It's a nice thought, but not quite accurate. In fact, our blood comes in a few different varieties. Our red blood cells contain a protein called hemoglobin that binds to oxygen, allowing the cells to transport it throughout the body. But they also have another kind of complex protein on the outside of the cell membrane. These proteins, known as antigens, communicate with white blood cells, immune cells that protect against infection. Antigens serve as identifying markers, allowing the immune system to recognize your body's own cells without attacking them as foreign bodies. The two main kinds of antigens, A and B, determine your blood type. But how do we get 4 blood types from only 2 antigens? Well, the antigens are coded for by 3 different alleles, varieties of a particular gene. While the A and B alleles code for A and B antigens, the O allele codes for neither. And because we inherit one copy of each gene from each parent, every individual has 2 alleles determining blood type. When these happen to be different, one overrides the other, depending on their relative dominance. For blood types, the A and B alleles are both dominant, while O is recessive. So A and A gives you type A blood, while B and B gives you type B. If you inherit one of each, the resulting co-dominance will produce both A and B antigens, which is type AB. The O allele is recessive, so either of the others will override it when they're paired, resulting in either type A or type B. But if you happen to inherit 2 O's, instructions will be expressed that make blood cells without the A or the B antigen. Because of these interactions, knowing both parents' blood types lets us predict the relative probability of their children's blood types. Why do blood types matter? For blood transfusions, finding the correct one is a matter of life and death. If someone with type A blood is given type B blood, or vice versa, their antibodies will reject the foreign antigens and attack them, potentially causing the transfused blood to clot. But because people with type AB blood produce both A and B antigens, they don't make antibodies against them, so they will recognize either as safe, making them universal recipients. On the other hand, people with blood type O do not produce either antigen, which makes them universal donors, but will cause their immune system to make antibodies that reject any other blood type. Unfortunately, matching donors and recipients is a bit more complicated due to additional antigen systems, particularly the Rh factor, named after the rhesus monkeys in which it was first isolated. Rh plus or Rh minus refers to the presence or absence of the D antigen of the Rh blood group system. And in addition to impeding some blood transfusions, it can cause severe complications in pregnancy. If an Rh negative mother is carrying an Rh positive child, her body will produce Rh antibodies that may cross the placenta and attack the fetus, a condition known as hemolytic disease of the newborn. Some cultures believe blood type to be associated with personality, though this is not supported by science. And though the proportions of different blood types vary between human populations, scientists aren't sure why they evolved, perhaps as protection against blood-borne diseases, or due to random genetic drift. Finally, different species have different sets of antigens. In fact, the 4 main blood types shared by us Atri in comparison to the 13 types found in dogs.
Okay, so I'm not sure if that helped you at all, but the idea here is that you have your blood cells have markers on them that identify them as you, And if other blood cells come in that are not you, our immune system will attack them. Okay, so it's important to know your blood type if you're going to receive blood. If you're giving blood, you know, they'll test it and find out what it is. Since I'm O positive, I'm called the universal donor. I can give it, and most people, as long as they're Rh positive, which most people are, can receive my blood in a pinch. If you are type B and you need more blood, the best thing for you to do is to get type B, of course. But you can get type O if you need it. All right, so if there's a need for it. So right now, they are asking for people to donate blood, and I would love to go do it because as type O, I can be the universal donor, so lots of people can use that. You have to be, I believe, 21 to give blood and over 110 pounds to give it. So one of these days, you might choose to do that. Very good. This is a copy of the anatomy of the interior of the heart. I am going to attach this to a email for you, including your quiz, and I want you to take this and fill this out. So what you can do is print this out before you watch this. Hopefully, I'll write that in the email, and then you can fill this out. You can pause the video right now and fill out these important parts right here. Okay, this is just going to go through each one of them that I talked about earlier, and there you go. Okay, so now we get to your experiment here, and what you're going to do in the book on page 350, it'll tell you how to do this. Essentially what you're going to do is you're going to take your pulse, you're going to find it, I often find it that it's easier to get it in the neck area, and then you look at a clock for 1 minute and you count your pulse it's called the resting pulse, just you sitting there, and then I think the book instructs you to do 20 jumping jacks or run around the room or something like that. I can't remember exactly. And then you're going to measure it again. Okay, so then follow the details, record that in your lab sheet. It might even have a chart or a graph or something for you to do. So go ahead and fill that out. Now, if, here it is, you're going to have your purpose, your hypothesis, trial 1 and trial 2, and your conclusions. Okay, your purpose is to measure your cardiac cycle. Your hypothesis is, I think that my heartbeat will increase upon exercise, that kind of thing. Trial 1 is resting, trial 2 is after some exercise. Then your conclusions about your cardiac cycle. You know, why when you exercise does it go faster like that? Also check out your breathing. Your rate of breathing will have increased as well. So check that out. Okay, so what we would do for your lab at this point is, after doing that, I would have for you a chicken heart, and you would dissect the chicken heart. Okay, I'd give you gloves and a tray and a tools, and you would cut it up. Now chicken hearts are pretty small, probably about the size of your thumb. Okay, so they're pretty small, and oftentimes they tend to get damaged in the processing. It turns out people eat chicken hearts. You can buy them at the grocery store. So if you're super interested in this, have your folks buy you some chicken hearts at the grocery store. They're cheap. And you can cut up a few and see if you can see the parts on the inside. Then you can cook them up and feed them to your dog or whatever. Although people eat them, apparently. That's why they sell them at the grocery store. But then after you did that, I was going to dissect a sheep heart, one that you would watch me do it. Okay, so here is a sheep heart. We're going to go through here and we're going to watch this video of this heart dissection. Now this is not me. You'll figure that out right away because it's a man who is dissecting this heart. He does a great job. I have the heart and I considered doing it, but getting my video set up with the proper amount of light and stuff like that is, starting to drive me a little crazy. So I found this one. It's really well done. So watch this closely. My heart that I had to show you looks exactly like this. It's preserved. It's from a sheep. The preservative makes it kind of this odd color right here. The chicken hearts would be bright red. They're fresh. And so, like I said, if you want to do that, you can go get one of those and try to cut those open. But watch this video right here and look for all the parts. And remember, you'll be labeling your sheet that I'll send to you. Here we go.
This is a demonstration of the anatomy of both the sheep heart as well as the human heart model.
Let's skip that.
So, regions, this would be the apex, and across the top would be the base. Apex, and across the top is the base. Pointing it like this, you can see that there is an auricle here, this little pouch that fills up when the atria fill up. And here's the other pouch here. These are the auricles. And because this is oriented so that as if it's your patient facing you, this is the left side of the heart, and this over here is the right side of the heart. Therefore, this would be the left atrium, the left auricle, and this would be the right auricle. And you also notice here that this has been dissected here. This is the pulmonary trunk. That way you can get to see the pulmonary valve. And then you have a frontal cut to open it up, to be able to open it up and see the four chambers and the anatomy inside, just like you would see it in a textbook. So, just to begin with the four chambers, you have the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. And you wonder, okay, well, what separates the atrium from the ventricle? Well, you have this atrioventricular valve. So this one over here would be the tricuspid, and this here would be the bicuspid. There's three cusps here, and there are two cusps on this side. Or you can call this the right atrioventricular valve, and this is the left atrioventricular valve. And there's also a third name for this, which is the mitral valve. So mitral valve, bicuspid, or the left atrioventricular valve. This is the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. These atrioventricular valves are also attached to chordae tendineae, which are then attached to papillary muscles. So here's a papillary muscle here. This is the chordae tendineae, these tendinous cords, and those tendinous cords are then attached to the atrioventricular valves that you see here. Quite large, and therefore they're easy to blow backwards when the pressure increases. Therefore, you need these strings to prevent the blood from escaping the wrong way when the ventricles are in systole. You also have this septum here. This is the interventricular septum. You have your ventricles here, so this is from here to here is the interventricular septum, and then from here to here is your interatrial septum. So that's this structure here. You also have three layers. You have the epicardium, this thin epicardium, and then this thick myocardium, and then you have a very thin layer on the inside, which is the thin endocardium. So three layers of the heart. Careful, because the probe could be pointing here. If the question is name the chamber, then that would be the right ventricle. But if the question is name the layer, that would be the endocardium. You also have these plate-like structures within the muscle, and that's trabeculae. So you have trabeculae, that's the plate-like structures. You have the chamber, and you also have the layer. So three different questions three different answers could be for three different questions, all pointing to the same thing. Just like this, name the structure, that's the interventricular septum, but name the layer, that would be myocardium. And so then, blood will then flow from here to here, and it'll go up and across. If you take the probe and you stick it like this, it will come out of the pulmonary trunk. So here's the pulmonary trunk. Therefore, the probe is actually going through the pulmonary valve, which you see here. Pulmonary valve. It's small, so it's much harder to see than these very large atrioventricular valves. And then the blood will then exit and go out the left and right pulmonary arteries, go to the lungs, come back, and through the left and right pulmonary veins, now oxygenated, and then it will enter this chamber, this chamber, and then it'll go up through this valve that you see right here. This is the aortic valve. And the aortic valve is small, just like your pulmonary valve, therefore you don't see any strings attached to it. These are also called semilunar valves. So this would be the left semilunar valve, or you can call it the aortic valve because it leads to the aorta. And you can call this one the right semilunar valve, or the pulmonary valve, because it leads to the pulmonary trunk. So therefore this vessel here then would be, you do this, you look up, therefore that would be the aorta. This vessel here is the pulmonary trunk. And then one more, you see here's the right auricle, and attached to that you have this vessel here, there it is, and that is the superior vena cava. The superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava would bring blood into the right atrium. So there could be a lot of questions. Here's the pectinate muscle, which is on the underside of the underside of the auricle, pectinate muscle. You have papillary muscle, you have myocardium, and then you have these plate-like structures, which is the trabeculae. Now,
Okay, that was a lot of information, and you don't need to know all of that information. I just wanted you to see the intricacies of that, and that's how I would have cut the heart open. I would have had it that way so we could see all of it at the same time. In other words, I cut the top from the bottom. We could see the two atria, the two ventricles, and hopefully some of those vessels coming in and out of there. Notice here on the front, this right here are the cardiac vessels, which feed this muscle right here, right? So this is a muscle too. All right, so you got out of this dissection, but I still need you to be responsible for the material in this. So filling out that paper I send will be a good start. All right, so that's it for this lecture, y'all. And be ready for next week when we talk about the respiratory system, which works obviously right in concert with the cardiac system, the circulatory system. Okay, well, have fun with it, and I'll get your quiz to you and hopefully see you real soon. Bye, y'all.